Okay, here we are again with the Sock Springer Productions, and we're going to hit the digestive system today and give you a run through the whole setup. So basically, you've got a lot tied in with the circulatory system and the nervous system. They go along with this and the respiratory system, but just centering mainly on those parts. So when you have some food coming in, first area, you've got the mouth right here, and the teeth are going to provide the first mechanical breakdown of your food. And the front ones are mainly for cutting, and those are the incisors. And then you move over to the side, and then you're going to have the canines right up in there. And then you can't, unfortunately, see the rest of those, but we have a little model here. And you've got your bicuspids, and then you've got your molars back here. They're kind of performing the grinding, mashing, making your food material into a pulp, the solid stuff that is. Okay, as we get past that stage, and during that whole process, you've got the tongue here that is manipulating that food, moving it around, running it around there so the teeth can mash it up, mixing it with saliva that's coming from the glands down in here. And with your tongue, you've got the apex part of it out in the front, the body part of it in here, and then the root back here where it's attached, and that's going to shove that food down there. At the same time everything's in the mouth, things are working with the salivary glands. You have the sublingual ones here that are located below the tongue. You've got the submandibular. They're located right in that lower jaw region. And then on the side, in front of the ear, you have the parotid glands, the largest set of salivary glands. You can see the little ductwork that's going down there. And those are excretory, exocrine glands, I should say. Okay, and so as we move down then, you've got the food pulped or mixed up with the saliva, which incidentally is also going to work on breaking down carbohydrates like starches. And then it gets forced down through the pharynx. Technically, the back part of the mouth here is going to be called the oropharynx. And then you drop down a few inches and you've got the pharynx. And then you have a split. It's going to drop forward. If you're just inhaling, exhaling, the food material is going to go down the backside. So you don't see the esophagus on the model here. It's back behind the trachea, right in here, traveling down. So you're moving from this stretch down to about here. Okay, once we get past the diaphragm, and we've got the liver right away. Now, largest organ in the body, this thing performs upwards of 400 different functions. The primary function that we want to discuss is bile production. You got a combination of bilirubin and cholesterol, and that material is going to get secreted into the upper part of the small intestine and work on helping to break down fatty materials. So for right now, we're going to pull the liver and discuss one more little structure on it. Underneath the right area, and there are a number of lobes with the liver, but you've got a little green-like gland that's called the gallbladder. And sometimes you hear about people getting gallstones. Gallstones are made up of cholesterol, and it gets crystallized. If you've ever done any crystal experiments when you were younger, then you would know that you start out with a little bit of material and it just keeps building up. But with that heavy concentration of cholesterol and that bile that's stored up in here, and this is about 50 milliliters, if you can kind of visualize that when it's clear full, but you could end up getting some pretty good sized gallstones, thumb sized in fact, and this could have to be removed, which isn't a major problem. The person may have to readjust their diet a little bit. Anyway, that takes care of the liver here. So we get to the stomach, and the esophagus is coming in right in this area. Now the esophagus, like a lot of other organs, and I think I've mentioned that previously, are made up of 3 layers. So you've got a 3-layered tube going lengthwise, diagonally, and circular around it there to help force food down there. And that process is called peristalsis. It squeezes it like you're squeezing a tube of toothpaste, forces it through a little muscular valve right here. And that's called the gastroesophageal constrictor, cardioesophageal sphincter, any number of names. They all refer to the same thing. It's a little band of muscles. It's going to stay closed until you have food coming through, relax, get stimulated, lets it go into the stomach, closes up again, because the stomach is going to start mushing things around. And you have 4 major regions on your stomach. And we're going to go to another model here. So if you can visualize, you've got this here. We open up the stomach. That band of muscles right here. This first part is going to be called the cardia. And then you've got the fundus, which is largely a storage area. And this will bulge up. When you're eating, a lot of that material comes out here. So you may feel a little fuller to the left side of your body. Then you get into the antrum part here, which is the main bulk of the stomach. And then the pylorus area right here. Now, if you notice all these little lines in here, and on a real dissected stomach, they tend to be almost linear going across there, but they allow the stomach to stretch out, creating more surface area in there to work on the food. And like I said, it's mushing around there. One article that I read talked about the stomach as looking like a sack full of wet cats trying to bulge around and get out of there. And it's punching all over the place. And there's some things you can YouTube, Google to take a look at that. Before we leave the stomach, though, notice that there is a spot right here that would be referred to as an ulcer. You've got H. pylori bacteria in the stomach, and if you get a weak area, that bacteria will tend to work on that and create a sore spot. If it gets to be too severe, this thing could start bleeding into the stomach, and that can be a severe situation, and the individual is going to end up in the hospital. Nobody is really walking around with a bleeding ulcer. You may hear somebody say that they have a bleeding ulcer. Probably a better way to state that would be they had a bleeding ulcer, and it was probably being taken care of, because if it's bleeding, you're getting blood leaking out there, and you can lose a fair amount. Several units could end up leaking out of there if you have a severe problem. So food, once it's all souped up, goes into this pyloric region, starts to get dumped through the pyloric sphincter. It'll relax when the food's the right consistency and work its way into the upper part of the small intestine here, which that upper part is the duodenum or duodenum, whichever way I want to pronounce it. And you can also get ulcers in that particular area. And this is also a 3-layered structure. Stomach is the same way, and you can kind of see you've got a layer here, another layer here, and an outer layer here, all arranged in a different fashion to provide that mushing action. Once you get into this area here, and we'll bring back our small intestine, would have been sitting here like this, and your stomach would have been dumping into it over on the right side. And along with that, when we look at the liver, would have been here, and turn it here, and over on that right side, you've got a little bile duct coming out of there. That's going to dump into that upper part of the small intestine. You've got about 21 feet in a full-grown adult of small intestine. In that upper part, right over in here, you'd see a lot of little tiny finger-like projections. Probably no bigger, maybe even smaller than the end of this pin. It'll be right in there, just thousands of them scattered around there. They create a large surface area for food to be absorbed into the circulatory system. Okay, so bile gets dumped in there from the liver, and then underneath the stomach, if you notice a little yellow strip right in here, that's the pancreas. Very important organ in the body. In fact, if you hear about somebody having pancreatic cancer, like Alex Trebek from Jeopardy, then that's not a very healthy situation. Most of the time that ends up being terminal within a year to two. He seems to be doing well right now, but one never knows. So the pancreas is here, and you've got a couple of things going on with that. We talked about or you will see something about the endocrine functions, where the islets of Langerhans are secreting some insulin to help work with blood sugar. Well, the rest of this right in here is producing a whole cocktail of enzymes to help break down different types of sugars and proteins that end up in the body. Those different sugars could be like sucrose, and you would have sucrase being produced. Lactose, you'd have lactase being produced. Maltose, maltase, etc. down the line. But they're all funneled over here into the small intestine. You can see where the little pancreatic duct comes in there. And they work on that throughout the whole setup for the upper part. Nutrients get absorbed, and then the rest of that is basically waste that's going to get processed and work its way down through here till you get to the lower right-hand side and you get into the large intestine. And if we're looking at this setup, I'm just going to overlay this little model in here, but the small intestine would be coming down through here. You have another little muscular valve called the ileocecal sphincter that keeps things closed. You don't want things going into the large intestine until they're ready. So this gets processed. You've got a soupy mess. It gets dumped in here. The first part is known as the cecum, and it has a little finger about like my little finger here, hanging down there, structure called the appendix. For years, they didn't think the appendix was used for anything. There was the old line that if you swallowed gum, they would end up being stored down there. If you had fingernails that you were chewing on, they'd get stored down there and then could irritate it. That's not true. They now know that there's a lot of bacteria that's in here, which is good. You've got bacteria all over in your body. Three main types with the digestive system, though. In your stomach, you have the H. pylori. You've got a lot of lactobacterium that's in the small intestine. Work with things. And then in your large intestine, you have E. coli. And you have to have those types of bacteria in there to help break down, finish that whole digestion process. So what they think happens when you take antibiotics, you're killing off a certain amount of bacteria in your body, and then some of that also affects the bacteria in your digestive system. So if you kill off amount in here and you need that, this may be a little reservoir that helps get that bacteria started again. For some reason, it doesn't seem to affect it nearly as much. There's still a lot of research going on that end of it. So the food material waste gets dumped into here. It's really going to be soupy, and it's going to work its way up the ascending colon here, across the transverse colon, and then down the descending colon. And through that whole process, it's absorbing extra water and some electrolytes that end up in there. So we get a little fluid replacement in our body that way, and works its way down through the whole process. It's getting a little more solid till you get down into the sigmoid colon here, fairly solid, to the rectum. And then you've got the anal canal right in here. Now to back up a little bit, you have some little areas here that would be polyps. And if they do a use a colon scope where they would come up through this way to check things out, usually with individuals that are 50 and older. They might look for those things. You can see the little bumps down in here. They could be a sign of cancer. It could be just something that's irritating the colon, but that could be a sign there. These little bulged areas are called diverticuli. They can get inflamed, and you can end up with diverticulosis or diverticulitis. If they would happen to rupture, it'd be similar to what would happen if the appendix would rupture, and you'd be dumping bacteria into this whole nice sterile area here, and end up with a bad case of peritonitis, which could be fatal. This would show one of those areas here where things are rupturing like that. So why doesn't it just go this way and drop out? Because you've got some more sphincters down in this area here. First one internally is the internal anal sphincter, and that's going to get stimulated by the amount of waste that's in here. And then you've got the external anal sphincter, which hopefully by the time you are 2 years old or so, you start to have control of that section right there so that you don't have to end up messing up your pants or anything else, or your diaper, and you can start working your way out of that situation. And the one thing that I've heard is we spend the first few years of our life trying to control that external anal sphincter, and we end up spending the last few years of our life trying to control the external anal sphincter. So once you start getting to be my age and older, sometimes that could be a difficulty. An interesting fact about this whole thing, though, it's got the ability to detect between gas in the system and solid waste. Little chemical signals, they go on there so that when you pass gas or flatulent, that it knows. So hopefully you don't have a mistake, which can happen, which I'm sure most people could relate to. And then it also tells you that when it's time to go to the bathroom. And you've got a little bit of time to get there, hopefully, to take care of things. If you suppress that for about 10 minutes, or for a little bit, then it may stay that way for about 10 minutes till you go again. Now, the more you suppress that, then the more you're likely to end up with constipation. And there's a whole variety of different medical conditions that could happen with the digestive system. That's pretty much the setup for the digestive system, but some things that can happen, mouth area, conditions like stomatitis, canker sores, cavities with the teeth. End up with these darkened areas here that start to affect the inside. You may have to have implants, crowns put on the teeth to take care of those things. You can end up with a tongue fungus. You can end up with a variety of things that irritate in there. Things can happen with the salivary glands. And of course, cancer can affect everything in the body, so I'm not going to go into that again. You go down the esophagus, where you are coming into the stomach, in this area here, this could get ruptured. People that are bulimic and tend to force food through can end up tearing this. And then that allows acid from the stomach, because your stomach produces hydrochloric acid. Little bits of that can come up in here. And if you notice the way this is setting here, that part right in there is right by the heart. And so when you talk about heartburn, it's nothing that's affecting the heart directly, but it feels like you may have an intense pain there. And especially if you tear this, I've heard that it could feel like you're having a heart attack. Going into the stomach, you can end up with the ulcer situations we talked about. Small intestine, same thing. Towards the end of the small intestine, sometimes we end up with a condition called Crohn's disease. Celiacs can affect the whole digestive system when people are glucose or glucose. I can't think of the name of the word right now that goes with the wheat products. Gluten. There we go. If they're gluten intolerant, if they have a problem with that, then that can affect the whole thing also and get some severe reactions with that. And ileitis, and once again, cancer can affect that whole thing. Large intestine, we talked about a few things there with diverticulitis, diverticulosis, polyps. Hemorrhoids could occur at the very end. And what that would amount to is, you've got this here where it's coming out of the body, then we can end up with little blister-like situations around the opening of the anal area, or they could be up inside, called hemorrhoids though, and it's just ruptured anal tissue. Could be very severe. If you ended up with a whole ring of them, they would call that a hemorrhoid rosette. You know, and sometimes those have to be surgically taken care of. Well, that pretty much wraps up the digestive system for now, and we will continue later on here with the nervous system for another video. Thank you.